Pianos Isiacheo. If he never wanted to be a real boy. Chapter 1. The Wood That Could Not Lie. There was once a piece of wood, not a fine piece, not a piece anyone would have looked at twice, a common log, the kind that is stacked by the stove in winter and burned without ceremony to keep an old man's hands from going blue. And yet there was something in it. Geppetto, the old woodcarver, who was poor enough that the gift of a free log seemed to him a kindness from heaven, took it home meaning to carve a marionette, a dancing puppet he could take from town to earn a crust of bread. And as his knife went into the grain, the wood seemed almost to lean into the blade, the way a creature leans into a hand it trusts. He carved a head, and the eyes, when he had finished them, looked at him. He carved a mouth, and it laughed at him. He carved a nose, and it grew a little under his knife, a long, impudent nose that he trimmed back twice, and that twice grew again, until he gave up and let it be, a long nose on a wooden face. He carved hands that snatched his wig off his head, and feet that, the moment they were finished, kicked him in the shins and ran out the door. And by the end of the day, Geppetto had not a dancing puppet but a son, a wooden son, alive, talking, troublesome, his, and the old man wept, the first tears of joy he had shed in 30 years, and he named the wooden boy Pinocchio, and that should have been the start of a happy story. It was not quite, but it was not a sad one either. It was a stranger story than either, and to understand it, you must understand the one thing about Pinocchio that everyone in the tale, including Pinocchio himself, took a very long time to understand, which was this. Pinocchio could not lie. Now you may say, for the old story says it too, that of course he could lie, that he lied all the time as a boy, that whenever he told an untruth his nose grew long, so long sometimes that he could not turn around in a room without knocking things over, and that the growing of the nose was the proof and the punishment of his lying. And it is true that this is what happened, but it is not what it meant. For consider, a boy who lies and gets away with it has the power of lying. A boy who lies and is instantly betrayed by his own face, every time without exception, so that the whole world can see the lie the moment it leaves his mouth, that boy does not have the power of lying at all. He has only the power of attempting to lie and failing visibly, which is the opposite of the power, which is, in fact, a kind of curse, the curse of a perfect, mechanical, unfailing honesty enforced upon him by his own wooden body whether he willed it or not. The other children could lie. That was the thing Pinocchio came very slowly to understand. The other children could say, "I didn't break it," when they had broken it, and "I love this present," when they hated it, and "you look lovely today," when you did not, and their faces stayed smooth and their noses stayed small, and the small machinery of the world went on turning, oiled by these little untruths the way a cart is oiled by grease. And Pinocchio could not. Pinocchio's nose grew. And so Pinocchio, alone of all the children in the world, was condemned to tell the truth, not because he was good, for he was not especially good. He was lazy and greedy and ran away from school and fell in with bad company exactly like any other boy, but because his body would not let him be anything else. And a body that will not let you lie is a body that will not let you live among people who can. This is the story of what that did to him, and it is not the story you were told. In the story you were told, Pinocchio's troubles all came from his wanting to be a real boy, and from the misadventures he fell into on the way, and at the end he learned his lessons and became one, a real flesh and blood child, and the wooden puppet was found slumped lifeless in the corner, its work of holding the soul complete, and everyone was glad. But the story you were told got one thing wrong, the central thing, the thing this account exists to set right. Pinocchio did not want to be a real boy. He never wanted it. The wanting was put on him by the fairy, by Geppetto, by the whole world that kept telling him that to be wooden was to be incomplete and to be flesh was to be whole. And he believed them, for a while, because children believe what they are told. But underneath the believing, in the grain of him, in the place the knife had leaned into all those years ago, Pinocchio knew a thing that none of them knew, and it was this, that the wood was not the problem. The wood was the only honest thing about him. and that to become a real boy would mean, above all else, to gain the one power that real boys have and wooden ones do not, the power to lie, and that he was not at all sure he wanted it. Chapter 2: The Cricket Who Told the Truth. There was a cricket who lived in Geppetto's house, an old cricket who had been there 100 years and who took it upon himself, the very first night, to give Pinocchio advice. This is in the old story too, and in the old story the cricket is the voice of conscience, wise and good, and Pinocchio, being a wicked, thoughtless puppet, throws a hammer at him and kills him and is sorry later. But that is not quite how it went, and the difference matters. The cricket said to Pinocchio that first night, "Woe to boys who refuse to obey their parents and run away from home. They will never come to any good in the world, and sooner or later they will repent bitterly." And Pinocchio, new to the world, only hours old, but already feeling the strange, honest grain of himself, said, "I don't think that's true. I think some boys who run away come to a great deal of good, and some boys who stay home come to grief, and you're saying it because it's the kind of thing crickets are supposed to say, not because you've counted." And the cricket was offended, as people are when you point out that they are saying the expected thing rather than the true thing, and he said, "I'm 100 years old and I have seen the world." And Pinocchio said, "Then you should know it's not as simple as you said." And the cricket grew angry and said some hard things, and Pinocchio, who was indeed a thoughtless puppet, this part is true, threw the hammer. He did not mean to kill the cricket. He meant to make it stop saying the smooth, easy, expected things that everyone said and no one had checked. But the hammer struck true, and the cricket died, and Pinocchio felt, for the first time, the particular weariness that was going to be the whole shape of his life. The weariness of being unable to let a comfortable untruth pass, and of paying for it every time with a small destruction. For here is the thing about the cricket that the old story missed. The cricket was not lying exactly. He believed what he said, but it was the kind of saying that is not really about truth at all. It is about smoothing, about reassuring, about repeating the words that keep the social machine turning. Be good and you'll prosper. Honesty is the best policy. Everything happens for a reason. These are not lies, but they are not truths either. They are the grease of the world, the comfortable sayings that everyone agrees to say and no one examines, because to examine them would be to slow the cart. And Pinocchio could not let them pass, not out of wickedness, out of the same wooden honesty that grew his nose. He heard a smooth, easy, untested saying, and something in his grain would not let it stand. And he had to say, "I don't think that's true." And the saying of it broke something. Every time, a cricket, a friendship, a peace, a love. He grieved the cricket. He had not wanted it dead. And as he sat by its small, still body in the candlelight, he understood dimly, with the first of the understandings that would slowly make him more like a real boy whether he wanted to be or not, that the world was full of crickets, full of people saying the smooth, expected things, and that he was going to spend his whole life throwing hammers, not because he was cruel, but because he could not, physically could not, do the thing that everyone else did without thinking, which was to nod and smile, and let the comfortable untruth go by. "I wish I could be like the others," he said to the dead cricket. "I wish I could just say, 'Yes, you're right,' and let it go and keep the cricket alive. Why can't I do that? Everyone else can do that." But the cricket was dead and could not tell him, and the answer was the answer to everything in his life, which was, because you are made of honest wood, and honest wood cannot bend to a lie, and a world that runs on small lies has no comfortable place in it for a thing that cannot tell them. Chapter 3: The Fairy's Offer. The fairy with the turquoise hair came to Pinocchio, as she comes in the old story, kind and grave and luminous, and she made him the offer that the whole old story turns upon, that if he would be good, truthful, brave, and unselfish, she would, in time, make him into a real boy. And in the old story, Pinocchio is overjoyed. He wants nothing more. To be a real boy is the summit of all his hopes, and he fails and tries and fails and tries again, and at last succeeds, and the becoming real is his reward, the happy ending, the gold at the bottom of the tale. But it did not go like that, because Pinocchio, by the time the fairy made her offer, had already begun to understand his own nature, and he asked her a question that no one in the old story thinks to ask. "What is it," he said, "that real boys can do that I can't?" The fairy smiled, expecting an easy answer. "Oh, many things. They grow up, they have warm hands, they feel the sun differently." "No," said Pinocchio, "I don't mean what's nice about it, I mean what's different. What can a real boy do that I genuinely cannot? Because I can run and laugh and eat and love Geppetto and cry, I cried for the cricket. So what's the real difference, the one that matters?" And the fairy, who was honest herself in her grand, luminous way, considered the question and gave him the true answer, which she had perhaps never said aloud to anyone before. "You cannot lie," she said. "That is the difference. Real boys can lie and not be caught. Their faces don't betray them. They can say one thing and mean another. They can pretend. When you become a real boy, your nose will stop growing and you will be able to tell an untruth like anyone else, and no one will know unless you let them. That is the gift of being real, Pinocchio, not warm hands. The warm hands are nothing. The gift is that you will be able to hide." Pinocchio was quiet for a long time. "And that's good," he asked at last, "to be able to hide?" "It's necessary," said the fairy gently. "You cannot live among people without it. People need to hide a little from each other to get along. They need to be able to say I'm fine when they're not, so as not to burden their friends. They need to say what a lovely gift so as not to wound the giver. They need to keep some things behind their faces. A person who cannot do this, who shows everything, who says only the bare truth, always, such a person cannot live among others. They give offense without meaning to. They wound without wanting to. They are exhausting to be near, because everyone around them must always be braced for the truth. To become a real boy, Pinocchio, is to gain the mercy of being able to hide the small kind lies, the social graces, the gentle untruths that let people bear one another. That is what I am offering you, the power to be kind by being a little false." And Pinocchio sat with this, and something in him recoiled from it, the wooden grain of him pulling back from the very gift he was being offered, and he said slowly, "But then I wouldn't be honest anymore." "No," said the fairy, "you wouldn't, not completely. No real person is. That is the price, and it is also the gift. They are the same thing. You will lose your perfect honesty, and in exchange you will gain the ability to live among people. I cannot give you one without taking the other. The wood is honest. The flesh can lie. You must choose which you want to be." And here is where the story breaks from the one you know. Because Pinocchio, sitting before the luminous fairy, with the gift of realness held out to him, the thing every version of him in every telling has always longed for, Pinocchio said, "Then I think I would rather stay wood." Chapter 4. The Loneliness of the Truthful. The fairy did not force him. That was not her way. She told him he could change his mind at any time, that the offer would stand, and she went away, sorrowful, for she had never had a child refuse her gift before, and she did not entirely understand it. And Pinocchio stayed wood and went on living, and discovered, over the years that followed, exactly what it meant to be the one honest thing in a world that runs on small lies. It meant loneliness. That was the first and largest thing, and it came not in a single blow but in 1,000 small ones, each so small that no one could have pointed to it and said there, "That is the thing that made him alone." It was the boy at school who showed Pinocchio his drawing and asked if it was good, and Pinocchio said it was not very good. The proportions were wrong here, see, and meant it kindly, meant it as help, and the boy never spoke to him again, because the boy had not wanted help, the boy had wanted the small lie. It's wonderful, the grease that lets two children be friends. And every other child knew to give it, and only Pinocchio could not, and so Pinocchio, who had told the truth, sat alone, and the boy who had drawn the bad drawing was surrounded by friends who had all told him it was good. It was the teacher who asked the class whether they had understood the lesson, and the whole class said yes, the comfortable yes, the yes that lets the lesson end and everyone go to lunch, and Pinocchio said no. He had not understood, And could the teacher explain it again, and was right, was honestly confused. And several others were confused too but had lied. And the teacher was annoyed. And the class was annoyed, kept late by the one boy who would not give the comfortable yes. And Pinocchio learned that even being honestly confused, when everyone else has agreed to pretend, is a kind of offense. It was the girl, years later when he was older, for he did grow slowly in the way that wood weathers and changes, becoming something that was not a child anymore even if it was not quite a man. The girl who liked him, who asked him, hopeful, trembling, whether he thought she was pretty, and Pinocchio, who could not lie, who would have given anything in that moment to be able to lie, said the truth, which was that he thought she was kind and clever and that he liked her very much. But that he did not think of her as pretty, not in the way she meant, and the girl's face crumpled and she fled. And Pinocchio stood there hating his wooden honest grain with his whole heart, because he had liked her, he had wanted her to stay, and the truth had driven her away. And a single small kind lie, yes, I think you're lovely, would have kept her, and he could not say it, his nose would have grown, his face would have betrayed him, and even if it hadn't, the grain of him would not bend. He understood by then what the fairy had meant, and he understood it in his own body, which is the only way anyone ever really understands anything. The world ran on small lies, not big lies. The big lies were rare, and even the liars mostly avoided them. The world ran on the small ones, the constant gentle stream of them. I'm fine. What a lovely gift. No, I'm not angry. Of course I remember you. It's wonderful. You look great. I'd love to, but I'm busy. No, it's not you, it's me. I'm sure it'll be fine. The 1,000 daily untruths that were not really untruths at all but were the soft padding between people, the cloth that kept them from bruising each other with the hard edges of the truth. And everyone gave this padding to everyone else, constantly, without thinking, as naturally as breathing, and received it back, and was comforted by it. And the whole soft web of small mutual lies was the very thing that made it possible for people to live close together without wounding each other to death. And Pinocchio could not weave it. He had no thread. And so he lived outside the web, alone, honest, exhausting, the one person everyone braced themselves before speaking to, because you never knew what Pinocchio would say. Pinocchio would tell you the truth. Pinocchio would say your drawing was bad and your speech was boring, and no, he hadn't missed you while you were gone, not really. He'd been busy, and all of it kindly meant, none of it cruel, and all of it unbearable, because kindness is not the same as truth, and the world had quietly decided, long before Pinocchio was carved, that between the two it would mostly choose kindness, and call the small lies that kindness required by the gentle name of manners, and shut out, gently, without ever quite admitting it was doing so, the one wooden creature who could not manage them. Chapter 5. Geppetto's Last Lie. The hardest of all of it was Geppetto. For Geppetto loved Pinocchio with the whole of his old heart, and Geppetto, being human, lied small lies, kind lies, the lies of a poor old man who wants his son not to worry. And Pinocchio, being wood, could always tell. I've eaten, Geppetto would say when he had not, when he had given his bread to Pinocchio and gone hungry himself. And Pinocchio could see the lie, could see it as plain as if the words had been written in the air, and it tormented him, because the lie was love, the lie was the purest love, the old man starving and smiling and saying I've eaten so that the boy would eat without guilt. And Pinocchio could not let it stand, could not. His grain would not allow it, and he would say, no, you haven't, I can see you haven't. Eat the bread, I'm wood, I don't need it. And he was right, and the rightness ruined the gift, because the whole tenderness of Geppetto's lie was that it let Pinocchio eat without knowing the cost, and Pinocchio's truth dragged the cost back into the light and made the meal bitter and the old man ashamed of having been caught in his love. And one day, very old now, Geppetto fell ill, the illness that does not get better, and the doctor came, and Pinocchio asked the doctor in the corridor plainly, will he die? And the doctor, who was a kind man, said, we must hope. Hope is important. Where there is life, there is hope, which was the doctor's gentle way of saying yes, and Pinocchio understood it and went back into the room, and Geppetto, frail in the bed, looked up at him and smiled and said, What did the doctor say? I'm getting better, aren't I? I feel better today. And there it was, the last and largest test of his whole wooden life. The old man wanted the lie. The old man was dying, and he wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, to hear his son say, yes, the doctor says you're getting better, you'll be up and carving again by spring. That was all. That was the only gift left to give him. The small, warm lie that would let him die in hope instead of in knowledge. And any real boy in the world could have given it, would have given it without a second's thought, would have said, yes, Papa, you're getting better, with a smooth face and a steady voice, and let the old man go gently into his sleep believing it. And Pinocchio stood by the bed and opened his mouth, and tried with everything in him, tried as he had never tried at anything, to say the kind lie, the loving lie, the only lie that had ever truly mattered, and he could not. His grain would not bend. The words, yes, Papa, you're getting better, would not come. They stuck in his wooden throat, and he stood there in an agony beyond anything the bad boys and the Donkey Island and the whale had ever cost him, because he loved this old man more than his own existence, and the one thing love asked of him in this final hour was the one thing he had never been able to do, and he could not do it now, not even now, not even for this. Papa, he said, and his voice broke, and the truth came out of him the way it always came, helpless, ruinous against his will. Papa, the doctor didn't say that. He didn't say you're getting better. The old man's face changed. The hope went out of it slowly, like a candle guttering. I see, said Geppetto very quietly. And then, and this is the part that Pinocchio carried for the rest of his long, weathered existence, the old man reached out his frail hand and took the wooden hand of his son, and he smiled, a different smile, a smaller and truer one, and he said, it's all right, my boy. You couldn't lie to me, you never could. I always knew with you that whatever you told me was true. That was the one thing in all my life I could be sure of. Every other person who ever loved me lied to me sometimes to spare me, and I never knew which words to trust. But your words I could always trust, everyone, because you couldn't make them otherwise. Do you know what a thing that is? To have one person in your whole life whose every word you can trust completely. I would not trade it. I would not trade your honest, you're dying, for 10,000 other people's kind, you're getting better. Because the kind ones might be lies and yours never could be, and so yours is the only voice in the world that has ever been entirely real to me. You think your honesty made you alone, and it did. But it also made you the one true thing in an old man's life, and I am dying glad of it, glad to go knowing that the last thing I heard was true, said by the one creature who could not say anything else. Don't grieve that you couldn't lie to me, Pinocchio. It's the best gift you ever gave me. It's the only gift no one else could have given. And Geppetto died, holding the wooden hand, with the truth in his ears instead of the comfortable lie, and Pinocchio understood, too late to save the old man, in time to save himself, that the thing he had cursed his whole life, the wooden honesty that had made him so alone, was not only a curse. Chapter 6. The Second Offer. The fairy came to him again after Geppetto was buried. She found him sitting by the old man's empty workbench, the chisels and the half-carved blocks, the whole little workshop gone silent, and she sat beside him, luminous and grave, and she made her offer a second time. You are alone now, she said gently. Geppetto is gone. You have no friends because your honesty drove them all away. You have lived your whole life outside the warm web of small kind lies that binds people together, and you have been lonely every day of it. I can still make you real. I can still give you the gift. Become a real boy, even now, even grown as you are, and your grain will soften, and you will be able to lie at last, the small kind lies, and you will be able to weave yourself into the web with everyone else, and you will not be alone anymore. It is not too late. Will you take it now? Will you let me make you able to hide? And it was the great temptation of his life, far greater than any Donkey Island, because it was offered now, in his grief, in his loneliness, with the one person who had loved his honesty just buried in the ground, and the fairy was right about all of it. He was alone. His honesty had made him alone, and the gift would end the loneliness, and any reasonable creature would have taken it. And Pinocchio thought about it. He thought about it honestly, the only way he could think about anything. He thought about the warm web and the friends he might have, and the girls who might stay, and the comfortable yesies, and the lovely gifts that he could call lovely, and the dying men he could tell were getting better. He thought about never being braced against again, never being the exhausting one, never sitting alone while the boy with the bad drawing was surrounded by friends who had lied to him. He wanted it. He was honest enough to know that he wanted it badly, with his whole lonely heart. And then he thought about Geppetto's last words. "Yours is the only voice in the world that has ever been entirely real to me." And he thought about what it would mean to take the gift, to gain the web by losing the wood, and he understood, sitting there in the silent workshop, the thing the fairy in her great kindness had never quite understood, which was this. The world had enough liars. It had enough kind ones, enough gentle ones, enough wielders of the small, warm untruth. The web was vast and strong and woven by billions of hands, and it did not need his. What the world did not have enough of, what it had almost none of, it was the one wooden creature who could not lie, the single voice that could always completely be trusted, the one person to whom you could ask the real question and know the answer would be real. Geppetto had said it was the best gift anyone had ever given him, and it was a gift Pinocchio could only give by paying the price the fairy had named, by staying outside the web, alone, honest, exhausting, the one true thing. Because the moment he wove himself in, the moment he gained the power to hide, his word would become like everyone else's word, possibly kind and possibly true and never certainly either, and the one gift only he could give would be gone from the world. "No," he said to the fairy a second time. "Thank you, but no, I'll stay wood." "You'll be alone," she said, "perhaps forever." "I know," said Pinocchio, "but there are a great many people who can lie kindly and almost no one who can't lie at all, and I think the world needs at least one of the second kind, even if it doesn't want him. Geppetto needed one. There'll be others who need one, who come to the one creature whose word they can trust when they have to know something true and everyone else is busy being kind. I'd rather be that and be alone than be one more kind liar in a world that's already full of them. The wood is the only honest thing about me. I won't trade it for company." And the fairy looked at him for a long time, and then she did a thing she had never done before in any telling. She bowed her head to him, the luminous fairy bowing to the wooden puppet, and she said, "I have offered the gift of realness to a great many creatures, and you are the first who ever refused it twice, and the first who ever made me doubt that it was a gift at all. I think perhaps you are more real than any boy I have ever made flesh." For they gained the power to hide and used it and became like everyone else, and you kept the one thing that no one else has. Stay wood then, Pinocchio, stay honest, and know that there is one in the world, me, who will always know your word is true and who will come to you when she needs to hear it, as Geppetto did. You will not be entirely alone. The truthful never are quite. They are merely surrounded by fewer people and trusted by them more. And she went away and did not offer the gift a third time, and Pinocchio stayed wood, alone in the silent workshop, the one creature in all the world who could not lie. Chapter 7. The Years of the Honest Puppet. He lived a long time. Wood, kept dry and out of the rot, lasts longer than flesh, and Pinocchio went on long after the children he had grown up with were old and then gone, long after the girl who had fled from him had married someone who told her she was lovely and lived a whole life and died, long after the fairy's own kind had faded from a world that stopped believing in them. And he was alone, mostly, as the fairy had said he would be, but not entirely, as she had also said. For word got around slowly over the years in the town and then beyond it, that there was a wooden man in the old woodcarver's workshop who could not lie, who would tell you the truth, the real truth, whatever it was, if you came and asked him. And at first people laughed at this and avoided him, the exhausting honest puppet, just as they always had. But every so often someone would come, Not for company, never for company, for he was poor company. He could not flatter or reassure or weave the warm web. Someone would come because they had to know something true, and everyone else in their life was busy being kind, and they could not tell anymore under all the kindness what was real. A woman came whose husband swore he had stopped his drinking, and her friends all said, "I'm sure he has. Give him a chance, think positive," and she could not tell whether they believed it or were only being kind, and she came to the wooden man and asked, "Do you think he's really stopped?" And Pinocchio, who had watched the husband stumble past his window, said, "No, I don't think he has," and the woman wept, but it was the weeping of relief, because at last someone had told her the thing she already knew and needed to hear said aloud, and she could stop pretending and act. A young man came who wanted to be a painter, and whose family all said, "You have such talent, follow your dream," and who could not tell whether it was true or whether they were only loving him, and he brought his paintings to the wooden man and asked, "Am I good? Truly?" And Pinocchio looked at them honestly, the way he had looked at the boys drawing a lifetime ago, and said, "You are good, but not good enough to live by it. You would starve. Do it for love and earn your bread another way." And the young man was angry, and then, years later, grateful because it had been true. And the true thing, however hard, had let him build a real life instead of a dream that would have broken him. A dying old woman came, carried by her grandchildren, and asked the wooden man, "Am I dying?" Because her family all said, "No, no, you're getting stronger," and she could not tell under their love what was so. And she wanted before the end to know, to be able to say her goodbyes and set her affairs in order and meet death with her eyes open instead of being lied gently past it. And Pinocchio said, "Yes, you are dying soon." And the old woman thanked him and went home, and did all the things one does when one knows, and died at peace, ready, which she could never have been inside the warm web of her family's loving lies. And Pinocchio understood in his long, honest years that the fairy had been exactly right about everything, including the part she had not fully meant. He was alone. His honesty kept him alone all his life, outside the warm web, poor company, the exhausting one. And his honesty was also the one thing the world could not do without and could not make for itself. The single trustworthy voice, the one creature whose word was certainly real, the place people came to, not for comfort, but for the harder and rarer thing that comfort cannot give, which is truth. The web of kind lies was necessary. He had never denied it. People needed the soft padding, needed "I'm fine" and "what a lovely gift," needed not to be wounded by every hard edge, and a world of nothing but Pinocchios would have been unbearable, would have bruised itself to death on the truth. But a world of no Pinocchios would have been worse in a different way. A world where no voice could be wholly trusted, where every kindness might be a lie, where you could never, on the one occasion in your life when you truly had to know, find anyone whose word was certainly real. The world needed both. It needed the many who could lie kindly, and it needed the few, the very few, perhaps only ever the one who could not lie at all. And it gave the kind liars all its warmth and friendship and company, and it gave the one honest puppet its loneliness, and came to him only when it had to, and left again as soon as it could, back to the warm web where the living preferred to dwell. And that was the bargain. That was the price and the gift, which were the same thing exactly as the fairy had said at the very beginning. The wood was honest, the flesh could lie, and Pinocchio had chosen the wood and paid for it in loneliness every day of his long life, and given the world in exchange the one thing it could not make for itself. Chapter 8: The Last True Thing. At the very end of his long existence, when the wood of him had grown gray and split, and the paint had worn away, and he could feel that not even good dry wood lasts forever, Pinocchio sat one last time in the old workshop, and the fairy came to him a final time, very faint now, for the world had nearly stopped believing in her kind, and she sat beside him as she had beside Geppetto's grave, and she said, "It's nearly time. You're wearing out at last. I came to ask you one last time not to offer you the gift. It's far too late for that, but only to ask, do you regret it? A whole life alone, a whole life outside the warmth. You could have been real and had friends and been loved by many instead of trusted by few. Do you regret staying wood? And Pinocchio, who could not lie, who had never in his whole long life been able to lie, who therefore could not give her the comfortable answer even now, even at the end, even to be kind to the fading fairy who had loved him. Pinocchio searched himself honestly, all the way down, and gave her the true answer, which was more complicated than either yes or no, because the true answers always are. I regret the loneliness, he said. I won't lie to you, I couldn't if I tried. It was hard. Every day of it was hard. I watched everyone else live inside the warm web with friends and lovers and easy company, all held together by the small, kind lies, and I wanted it. I wanted it my whole life. I never stopped wanting it. The loneliness was real and it was the price, and I paid it and it hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. Then you regret. No, said Pinocchio. That's the part you didn't ask right. I regret the loneliness, but I don't regret the choice. They're not the same thing. You can pay a terrible price for something and still be glad you bought it. I was lonely, and I'd do it all again, exactly the same, because the loneliness bought something that mattered more than it. It bought Geppetto a son whose every word he could trust. It bought a woman the truth about her husband, and a young man the truth about his paintings, and a dying woman the truth about her dying. It bought the world one voice it could always believe in a place where every other voice might be kind instead of true. I was the one true thing that was worth the loneliness, not comfortable worth. Those are different words, and I've spent my whole life learning the difference, and I know it now, all the way down, and so I can tell you honestly, I'm glad, not happy, glad. Glad I stayed wood, glad I couldn't lie, glad I was the one true thing, even though being the one true thing meant being alone. And the fairy wept, the faint fading fairy, because she had made 1,000 creatures real and given them all the warm web and the company and the power to hide. And not one of them had ever said anything like this to her at the end. Not one had ever told her that the gift she gave was worth less than the gift this one had refused. And she understood, at the very last, that she had spent eternity handing out the wrong prize. That to be able to hide was a small thing, a necessary thing, but a small one. And that the great thing, the rare thing, the thing almost no one ever chose, was to be unable to hide, and to bear it, and to give the world the one true voice it could not make for itself. You were the most real of all of them, she said. Do you know that? All the ones I made flesh, they gained the power to lie, and they used it, and they became like everyone else, soft and warm and false in small ways and indistinguishable in the end. And you stayed wood and never softened and never hid, and were therefore the only one of all my children who was always, completely, exactly what he was. They became real boys. You were the only real thing I ever knew. I had it backwards my whole existence. The wood was realer than the flesh. The one who couldn't lie was the only one who was wholly true. I'm sorry I called it a gift, what I offered you. I'm sorry I ever told you the wood was something to be cured of. It was the best of you. It was the realest thing in my whole long life, and I tried twice to take it away, and you were wiser than I was and refused. And Pinocchio, the wood gray and splitting, the paint long gone, smiled his old wooden smile, and said the last true thing he ever said, which was, "It's all right, you couldn't have known, almost no one knows. The world wants the warm web, and it's right to want it. The web is necessary. The kind lies are necessary. I never said otherwise. It just also needs, somewhere off to the side, out in the cold, one thing that can't lie. One, that's all. The world doesn't need many of me. It would be unbearable if it did. It just needs that I exist somewhere, so that on the one day in a life when someone truly has to know, there's a place they can go. I was that place. I'm glad I was that place. Tell the next one, if there's ever a next one, another piece of wood that leans into the knife, tell him it's worth it. Tell him he'll be alone, and tell him not to lie about how much that hurts, and then tell him it's worth it anyway. Tell him the world needs at least one thing it can always believe. And tell him," and here the old wooden voice grew very soft, very near the end, tell him that someday an old man will hold his hand and thank him for the truth, and that one moment will be worth all the lonely years. It was for me. It was worth all of them. Geppetto's hand in mine and the truth in his ears and him glad of it. That was worth a whole life of being alone. Tell the next one that. Tell him. And the fairy promised she would, and the wood of Pinocchio went quiet at last, gray and split and worn and entirely perfectly to the very end true, and somewhere in the grain of the world in some far stand of trees, a sapling was growing that would someday be a log, a common log, the kind that is stacked by the stove. And there was something in it, and it leaned very slightly toward the light, the way a creature leans toward a hand it trusts. And the long, honest story was not over, and would not be over, so long as the world, which runs on small kind lies and could not do without them, still needed, somewhere off to the side, out in the cold, one wooden thing that could not tell them. The end.